Okay, so good afternoon, everyone joining us live. And as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, if you are listening to the recording. As you all know, we're going to be discussing autoimmune disease today. But before we do so, because we always have some new attendees, this might be the first webinar that you have joined. My name is Alex Manos. I am the Functional Medicine Director at HealthPath. And my primary background is in nutritional therapy. So I have a master's degree in personalized nutrition, a degree in nutritional therapy, and I certified with the Institute for Functional Medicine in 2016. And you could argue that actually I have somewhat of a history of autoimmunity in the sense that I have struggled with psoriasis at various points in my life, which is thought to be an autoimmune condition. So this is yet another webinar where I am talking about a topic or a condition or conditions that I have some personal experience with as well. So the objectives today are very simple. We're going to explore from a functional medicine perspective autoimmune diseases in regards to what may contribute or cause them, and what are some of the more general things that we need to be considering if we have been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, which is going to be quite a lot of us because they are increasingly prevalent here in the UK and around the world. So according to Diabetes UK, there are 400,000 people in the UK with type 1 diabetes, and this is increasing 3% per year. There's 700,000 people in the UK with rheumatoid arthritis, 115,000 with Crohn's disease and inflammatory bowel disease. In regards to multiple sclerosis, in 2014, it was estimated 127,000. And again, this was increasing at a rate of 2.4% per year. So not only do we see large numbers, but there is an increasingly worrying rate of growth with these statistics as well. So obviously a question becomes, why? Why is there such an increase in these conditions? It cannot be explained purely through genetics because of the rate of increase. And therefore there is absolutely an environmental component to this, which is obviously really what we're going to be exploring today. And there are two well-known sayings in the functional medicine world. Genetics loads the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. So you may have some genetic predispositions to an autoimmune condition. It doesn't mean that you are destined to get that autoimmune disease. If you are living in an appropriate environment, a healthy environment, then you are much less likely for that genetic predisposition to manifest. The second saying, treat the individual, not the disease, means we each have our own health history, and we'll each have our own combination of factors that have led to the diagnosis of whatever autoimmune disease we may have. So a common question people ask is, I have condition X, what should I do? And in the context of today, that could be Hashimoto thyroiditis, an autoimmune thyroid condition. It could be rheumatoid arthritis. It could be ulcerative colitis, an inflammatory bowel disease. But there isn't a treatment plan from a functional medicine perspective based on the diagnosis or label that you have. The question becomes, in your unique context, what are the triggers? What are the environmental considerations that might be modifiable that can help put you into a remission? The way that I've sort of structured this presentation is influenced by something called the functional medicine timeline, which is this really basic concept, but very powerful concept, which is to understand why we are in the state of health we are in today. We have to understand your life story and your health history and your medical history, because there's this concept of resiliency and allostatic load in the research. This concept really is that it's somewhat rare that one specific environmental trigger is going to have caused your health issues. it is more often that it's an accumulation of factors over your lifetime that have led to a point where your physiology has no longer been able to maintain homeostasis or a healthy balance. And that accumulation has led to a shift in physiology to a new set point. And that could be diagnosed as anything from high blood pressure to high cholesterol to an autoimmune condition, or to something like irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome. Our physiology has recalibrated to a new set point. And this has come from an accumulation of wear and tear over a period of time. And that time is at least our lifetime, but possibly also our parents and grandparents, based on our understanding that their health and their lives do influence our health and our lives. So we're going to kind of briefly touch on all of these things today to help us understand from this sort of resiliency or allostatic perspective that we want to take what Dr. Tom O'Brien often refers to as the 30,000-foot view. And then, and only then, can we really burrow into some of the specifics in each and every case of someone with autoimmunity. So birth and autoimmunity. Interestingly, some research suggests that there may be an association between cesarean sections and diseases associated with the immune system. And that also there may be a difference between cesarean sections that are elective versus cesarean sections that are sort of from an emergency. So children delivered by both acute and elective cesarean had an increased risk of asthma, laryngitis, and gastroenteritis. And then children delivered by acute cesarean section had an increased risk of ulcerative colitis and celiac disease, whereas those delivered by an elective cesarean had an increased risk of lower respiratory tract infection and juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So there is an increased risk of being born from cesarean compared to a vaginal birth. In the research, there's a slight difference between the two, whether it's an elective or whether it's more of an emergency C-section. And this is partly related, obviously, to the fact that as that baby is traveling through the vaginal canal, it is being exposed to the mother's microbiome, to various bacteria that then seeds and supports the immune system of that baby. And then that baby can have a more well-modulated immune system going through life. Now, it's not as, I guess it's not as significant as we once thought. And with growing understanding of the microbiome and our immune system, there are things that we can do to ensure that babies delivered via cesarean section have a reduced risk of going on to develop these conditions. And then we have breast versus bottle and autoimmunity. So breastfed is associated with the lower incidence of diabetes, celiac disease, multiple sclerosis, and asthma. And it's a similar concept. You know, if we are breastfed, we are receiving immunomodulatory, anti-inflammatory, immune-regulating molecules via the milk that is supporting the gut microbiome, which is then modulating our systemic immune system. So we're really receiving the best nutrition possible. The protective role of human milk in juvenile arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and inflammatory bowel disease does remain controversial. So again, we don't have to be, I don't say these things to make us worried. You know, I've had clients sometimes who were born via C-section, were bottle fed, and there's no point worrying about it. There's nothing we can do about it anymore, but it gives us an understanding of someone's microbiome and how well modulated and how well developed that immune system is. And then we know that that person may need to focus on supporting the gut microbiome as a result of those early environmental factors. And then moving into childhood, a really important thing to consider is what are referred to as adverse childhood events. Adverse childhood events are essentially traumatic stressors. These can be things like physical neglect, emotional neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, witnessing domestic violence, parents who were drug users in the home, a parent who got incarcerated. These adverse events have been strongly associated with disease in adulthood, including autoimmune diseases. Now, the reason being is if we are growing up in a stressful environment, our nervous system is obviously sensing that. And we're growing up with this sort of underlying belief that the world is scary, it's stressful, it's threatening. And as a result, the belief is that we need to have a very vigilant nervous system. We need to be able to mount an acute and appropriate stress response to stay alive, because the world is a stressful, scary place. And if you have a really hypersensitive stress system, you are going to experience more wear and tear, more stress throughout your life. And that wear and tear is wear and tear on our physiology. So going back to this idea that health and disease are related to the accumulation of wear and tear, if we've been exposed to these adverse childhood events early on in life, that is a predisposition to illness later on, because our physiology is just literally reacting to things in a greater or more stressful way than if we were growing up in a very safe environment. And then we have antibiotics and autoimmunity. Now, this shouldn't be too surprising if you have this understanding and awareness that the microbiome plays a big role in modulating our immune system. And what are autoimmune diseases? They are diseases where the immune system is dysregulated, put very simply. The microbiome helps regulate, helps modulate the immune system. And therefore, any stressor, anything that is disrupting the microbiome, is going to have an impact on our immune system and potentially increase our risk of developing immune-based disorders. Now, the research is certainly not unanimous in this area, but some data certainly suggest that antibiotics may facilitate autoimmunity. And that makes sense. We're never really going to have an area where we can say this environmental trigger always contributes to X, Y, or Z. Because as we've just been discussing, dis-ease is an accumulative experience. And exercise has been referred to as the polypill. It has so many different mechanisms by which it supports human health. These are just some of them mentioned in this paper, looking at autoimmune disease and physical activity. So exercise elevates T regulatory cells. Imagine these T regulatory cells as a quarterback in American football managing the linesman. T regulatory cells help modulate, help regulate our immune system. We need appropriate amounts of these T regulatory cells to have a healthy, regulated immune system. Exercise promotes the release of something called interleukin-6, something that gets referred to as a myokine. This basically provides an anti-inflammatory benefit to the body. So exercise at appropriate levels is anti-inflammatory. Exercise has been shown to be safe in most autoimmune diseases. And in fact, the incidence of some of these common autoimmune diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, and psoriasis, have been found to be higher in patients who are less engaged in physical activity, suggesting a sedentary lifestyle increases our risk of going on to develop an autoimmune disease. So the concept that we should be walking approximately 10,000 steps a day, I think, is a sensible goal for many of us to be aiming for, if it's appropriate based on our state of health. And we should absolutely be doing some strength training on top of that, say 3 or 4 times a week as well, because muscle mass has a big role to play within our immune system. And then at the other kind of end of the spectrum, in some ways, those with autoimmune conditions who are able to maintain their physical activity had a milder disease course, and they had better symptom profiles and cardiovascular profiles and better joint mobility compared to those people with the same autoimmune condition who were living sedentary lifestyles. We really can't underestimate the role that exercise plays in all areas of health. Now, tied in with that, and perhaps another mechanism by which physical activity can reduce our risk of autoimmune conditions, is the fact that there is a relationship between obesity and autoimmune disease. And maybe this actually explains why some of these conditions are increasing year after year, because we do have an obesity epidemic in the UK. We have an increasing sort of waistline ultimately at the population level. So body composition, your current weight, the amount of body fat that you hold, is another thing to consider within the context of autoimmunity. So anything we can do to lose any excess fat that we have is actually going to have a really favorable impact on our immune system. And then we have infections in autoimmunity. So although we will be touching on nutrition, and we've already touched on a lot of the environmental and lifestyle factors, infections are one of those sort of triggers that can be, sometimes I describe it as sort of the final nail in the coffin in many ways. There are many organisms that have been associated in the research as being potentially able to trigger autoimmunity. This is a paper that came out last year in a reputable journal called Frontiers of Immunology, and it discussed specifically the Epstein-Barr virus. Many of us know this virus because it's associated with mono or glandular fever. Often people pick it up in their adolescence, and it can contribute to sort of chronic fatigue syndrome and various autoimmune conditions as well. And it's able to infect the epithelial cells. The epithelial cells line, for example, blood vessels and the digestive lining. But they can also infect a type of immune cell called B cells. And when they infect our B cells, Epstein-Barr virus has been associated with rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, among other autoimmune conditions. So sometimes a client may have a history of mono or glandular fever, which would add to your suspicion that maybe the Epstein-Barr virus is a factor within their current state of health. And then we have this relationship between stress infections and autoimmunity. Chronic stress actually increases our susceptibility to infections and also our ability to eradicate the organism. So if you're chronically stressed, you're more susceptible to an infection and you're going to struggle to get rid of it. Stress can also actually increase the pathogenicity of some organisms, meaning it can increase how problematic they are and how many symptoms they may cause. And this is all really because the relationship between you or I, the host, and the organism, the infection, is really what influences the severity of symptoms. So the state of our immune system, the state of our gut health and our gut microbiome, our nutrient status, these sorts of things will influence our relationship with any infection that we may pick up. But as well as the Epstein-Barr virus, we have various bacteria, parasites, and viruses that have been associated in the research with autoimmunity. So you might have heard of Lyme disease, a condition associated with the organism Borrelia. I recently spoke to a specialist on Lyme disease who spoke about how this organism Borrelia, yes, it causes Lyme, but it can also contribute to autoimmune diseases. And that might be one of the sort of mechanisms and the things going on when people struggle with chronic Lyme. But other viruses include CMV, the Coxsackie virus, the endogenous retrovirus. And we have bacteria such as Klebsiella pneumoniae and Proteus muriabilis, which have all been associated with autoimmune conditions. So if you have an autoimmune condition, considering could an infection be driving that immune dysregulation is always going to be an important thing to consider. And really that's going to obviously require working with a health practitioner who is aware of this research. Environmental toxins and autoimmunity. So this is a brilliant paper that came out, again, only last year by the genius that is Datis Karazian, who is a big name in the functional medicine space. He does a lot of education and is a well-respected figure, ultimately. So in this paper, he discusses how the increase in autoimmune disease prevalence and incidence rates all correspond with data around environmental toxic load exposure. This has been backed up by twin studies that have been done, where they found that genetics can only account for increased susceptibility to autoimmune diseases to a very small amount, and that environmental triggers are really the necessary tipping points that turn genetic expression around and into disease. And environmental chemicals are one of these environmental triggers that can turn on the genetic expression of these diseases. This is the concept of epigenetics. You may have the genetic predisposition for a condition, but the gene has to be turned on. And we can modulate genetic expression through our lifestyle and environment, how we think, our emotional well-being, what we eat, how we move, i.e. our physical activity, and the things we're exposed to in our environment. All of these things are influencing how our genes are being expressed. So in the research, these are some of the categories of environmental toxins and the specific chemicals that have been associated with autoimmunity and the most common exposure sources of those chemicals. So persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. We have toxic solvents, heavy metals, and what are often referred to as endocrine or hormonal disruptors. And look where some of these are found. Things like flame retardants, glue, paint, plastic products, herbicides and pesticides, the lining of cans. These are things that many of us are being exposed to on a daily basis, fundamentally. Dental amalgams are a source of mercury, cosmetics. So this is one of the reasons why we want to do the best that we can with the resources that are available to us to eat an organic diet, for example, to minimize our use of plastics, and to think about the quality of air and water that we're breathing and drinking. Now, I didn't think this would come out particularly clear. This is an image from this same paper, and it kind of shows you the black bit in the middle. It just says toxic chemicals, and it summarizes the known mechanisms by which environmental toxins can contribute to autoimmune disease. So some of these include the depletion of glutathione. Glutathione is the main antioxidant in the human body. We can produce it via essentially ensuring that we have a good, healthy diet, for example. But a depletion in glutathione is going to increase oxidative stress. It's going to increase cellular damage and wear and tear at a cellular level. And it's going to impact our immune system. But we also find that some of these chemicals combine to different components of our tissues, and they can suppress certain components of our immune system, all of which leads to potentially autoimmune conditions. Now, we have to just bear in mind that we live in a very toxic world. There are thousands of new chemicals being produced every year that we are being exposed to. So we just need to do the best that we can. You know, can you afford to buy an air purifier for your home to improve the quality of the air that you're breathing in when you're in your home? There is plenty of research showing us that indoor air quality is a significant problem, especially if you're living in a city. So air purifiers can be helpful. A water sort of filter to get rid of some of the environmental toxins in tap water. Little basic things that can all be very helpful. You know, what kitchenware do you cook with? Then we have stress and autoimmunity. Chronic psycho-emotional stress on its own is a big factor and a potential trigger of autoimmune disease. And in fact, in retrospective studies, they found that up to 80% of patients reported uncommon emotional stress before the disease started, suggesting that there is a really big connection here. Now, we know that stress dysregulates our immune system, among many other things. So I just brain dumped some of the most obvious things that would connect stress and autoimmune disease. Stress will compromise immune function through various ways. We don't need to go into all the nitty and the gritty. We know very well that that will happen. Now, it might partly do that because chronic psycho-emotional stress can actually contribute to this concept of leaky gut. It can create imbalances within our gut microbiome, referred to as dysbiosis. It can increase the likelihood of nutrient deficiencies. And if stress is chronic, we can actually develop cortisol resistance, which is also going to then compromise immune function. And all of these things will lead to chronic inflammation and elevated levels of oxidative stress. Just think of this as cellular damage. Inflammation and oxidative stress, we know, are big drivers of autoimmune conditions. So that's a very simple but yet accurate idea of thinking between, thinking of the mechanisms between stress and autoimmunity. And then we have to comment on hormones and autoimmunity. There is a significant sort of, one of the better word, bias towards females. More women than men suffer with autoimmune conditions, which is just one of the indicators that our hormones have a big role to play here. The higher prevalence of autoimmunity among women at childbearing ages, disease onset or relapses during pregnancy and postpartum are some of the other arguments that support this hypothesis. So some women with an autoimmune condition, either they'll go into full remission in pregnancy, or in or after pregnancy, they will develop an autoimmune condition. And obviously there are significant changes happening in hormones and our immune system during pregnancy. Concentration-dependent effects of estrogen on the immune system. The immune system is heavily influenced by the amount of estrogen circulating around, but also other hormones, progesterone, androgens, things like testosterone and DHEA, leptin, which is discussed in the context of obesity quite a lot, oxytocin and prolactin. They all have a role to play within regulating our immune system. We also have different branches of our immune system called Th1 and Th2, and there needs to be balance between this. That you can almost think about it quite simply like a seesaw. That balance can be lost when there are imbalances in these hormones or other imbalances in the body, chronic stress, for example, nutrient deficiencies. All of these things will increase the likelihood of going on to develop an autoimmune condition. So look at this, rheumatoid arthritis, 3-1. Rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile, 2-1. Psoriasis is actually 1-1 almost. Autoimmune hepatitis, though, 4-1 or 6-1. Lupus, 6-1. So there is absolutely something here around sort of, in particular, estrogen and just sex hormone balance that we're starting to understand a little bit more. And then we have nutrition. This is a very tricky one to cover in today's webinar because ultimately it's going to be quite personalized to the individual. So I'm just going to only really talk about some of the more general things that we can all consider ultimately. So first of all, a quote from this paper that both the type and the levels of nutrients can influence the generation, survival, and function of lymphocytes, which are a type of immune cell, and therefore affect several autoimmune diseases. So it's not just about the type of the nutrients, vitamin A, vitamin D, selenium, zinc, for example, but the level, the amount that we have. Now, this paper was primarily talking really about fasting. And there is the concept of fasting mimicking, and there's the fasting mimicking diet that you may have come across. But this is the idea that after 3 days of fasting, like a water fast, that is when certain cellular pathways really kick in, and we start to see regeneration of cells. The fasting mimicking diets, which you can see here, if I skip forward a couple of slides, prolon.co.uk. We have no affiliation with them. They're just the company I'm aware of that offer essentially this fasting mimicking diet. Their research has suggested that the specific, I guess, combination of foods or nutrients that you consume over these 5 days means that you still get the benefits associated with doing a water fast for a minimum of 3 days without actually having to do a water fast for 3 days. It's still a very low calorie diet, obviously, but it can be a little bit easier compared to literally just consuming water. So caloric restriction or various other dietary restrictions, and particularly relatively long-term fasting, i.e. 3 days or more, really promote this kind of anti-inflammatory effect. And it's been shown that at that 3-day point, you start killing off old and damaged cells and replacing them with young and newer, healthier functioning ones. So bear in mind that we are constantly regenerating ourselves, but to do so, we have to be in the correct environment. So we need certain nutrients in a day-to-day perspective, but we may also need the absence of foods. Not all of us are going to be able to tolerate this at this point in our health journey. So please bear that in mind. I am not advocating anyone goes and does a 3+ day water fast without seeking medical advice. However, from an evolutionary perspective, we would have fasted. We would have been forced into fasting at times because of various types of famine, I guess, ultimately. So it is part of our way of life from a very traditional perspective. And I love this quote. It really resonated with me. This concept of things remaining dormant in individuals who are constantly exposed to food intake, and in which fasting periods lasting for over a few days are generally absent. So we have these self-healing pathways, these self-healing processes lying dormant in us that can be activated through the implementation of fasting, which I think is fascinating. It's not the only thing that I would argue is a self-healing process that lies dormant. We know how healing breath work can be when used in a specific way, but most of us have dysfunctional breathing patterns and aren't even aware of those dysfunctional breathing patterns. There is a webinar I delivered that's on our YouTube channel, which is just Health Path, talking about the role that breath work can play in healing things like irritable bowel syndrome or chronic gut conditions. And we know anecdotally the role that the breath can play via several different mechanisms when it comes to illness and disease. So we've already kind of mentioned this concept of autophagy. Autophagy is just the name for your body's natural cell optimization process that kicks in usually on day 3 of a prolonged fast. And this is just a recycling system. We're recycling old and damaged parts for new ones. It is literally cell rejuvenation. And this, it's thought, can be really helpful in putting autoimmune conditions into remission and returning to good health. It's not for everyone, as I've already mentioned. Some people really struggle with doing a 12-hour fast. Some people struggle with a 5-hour fast, if you sort of call it that, for various reasons: significant blood sugar dysregulation, significant adrenal dysfunction are all potentially reasons why some people may struggle with this. And then from a nutrient perspective, there's a lot that can be considered. I mean, I've added ones that have been discussed in the research here. There's a lot of research associating vitamin D deficiency with an increased risk of autoimmunity. Vitamin A has a big role to play within our mucosal immune system, but antioxidants like selenium, zinc, and glutathione have been discussed in specific contexts and specific autoimmune conditions. Selenium, for example, has some research behind it in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, a thyroid autoimmune condition. But it's very likely that there are many others, ultimately, that are in various ways having a role to play here. Now, many of you will have probably come across this concept that leaky gut is almost a prerequisite for autoimmune disease. This is somewhat debatable, but it is for many a key thing that has to be considered. The really important message I think I want to get across today is there is a common, I think let's call it belief, that some people out there have an autoimmune condition. They understand that leaky gut can contribute to it, and they think that if they can heal leaky gut, they will heal their autoimmune condition. And they think they can heal their leaky gut by sort of tweaking the diet and taking some supplements that have been shown to be helpful, things like glutamine and zinc carnosine. The problem is it's not often that simple for various reasons. We don't actually have strong evidence showing us that if you just heal the leakiness of the gut, that the autoimmune condition will change. But more importantly, we have to ask the question, why does someone have leaky gut in the first place? So it's incredibly important within the context of autoimmunity. But the question is why? So if you do a leaky gut test, you understand that this is part of your health status, part of your picture. But then the question becomes, why do you have it in the first place? It could be related to a really poor diet where someone's eating a lot of processed foods, heavily refined, sugary carbohydrates. It could be related to chronic psycho-emotional distress, excess alcohol. It could be related to medications, including things like the birth control pill or antibiotics. It could be there's an imbalance within the gut itself, whether that's an infection or just an imbalance, this term dysbiosis that we've mentioned a few times, or SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. It could be related to a non-gut issue like a liver disease. It could be related to issues in the gut-brain axis. Maybe someone's had a head trauma and now there are issues in something like the vagus nerve, which helps regulate digestive function. So we have to almost keep asking why until we feel we're at the actual root cause of what we see in these test results. I think leaky gut testing can be helpful, absolutely. And I think if we're able to retest, it's a way of sort of tracking the efficacy of the program. Some studies have actually suggested that people with inflammatory bowel disease, they may see an increase in the leakiness of the gut a few months before they relapse. So someone with inflammatory bowel disease might consider doing something like a leaky gut test once or twice a year as part of like an MOT almost. So often what we're really asking when we go and see a health practitioner is, what's the tipping point? But we have to think about that as well as someone's overall health history and life history. So how many of these are relevant for an individual? How many of these are relevant for you watching this webinar. And most of these, not all of them, but most of them are modifiable to some degree. You know, we can improve upon our microbiome. We can seek support for previous traumas or stressors. We can look to lose body fat. We can look to be more physically active. We can improve our diet. We can learn skills to manage stress to some degree. We can understand a little bit more and learn through podcasts and books what to consider from an environmental toxin perspective. I did a great podcast with Lara Adler, all about detoxification. Again, it's on our YouTube channel, on our podcast, but she did an amazing job of just breaking it down and talking about very easy, actionable, sometimes free things that we can do to reduce our toxic exposure, which is going to reduce our risk of developing an autoimmune condition. So many of these we can improve, we can modify, which is the good news, ultimately. So in regards to tests, well, there's kind of a long list of things to consider. You know, we've talked a lot about the gut today. So stool testing, SIBO testing, leaky gut testing may all be appropriate for some of us with autoimmune conditions. There are tests that can be done to look at the infections that we've discussed, to look for some of these environmental toxins that we've discussed. And if you're working with a practitioner, they may well recommend an alternative test based on your unique history. You know, hormone testing would be another obvious consideration, for example.